Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Lunchtime Webinar Express series. Today, our guest speaker is Eleanor Mills, founder and editor-in-chief of noon.org.uk. So before we get started with Eleanor's presentation, I'll just quickly go over a few things and how you can participate in the live Q&A. We'll be hearing from Eleanor for around 30 to 35 minutes, when we'll then move into a 10 to 15-minute Q&A session to answer some of your questions. If you're registered for the webinar, you'll be able to post your questions for the Q&A at any time during the session by clicking on the question mark. If you are watching on a laptop, you'll find the question mark on the right-hand side of your screen, or along the top or bottom if watching on a tablet or smartphone. If you're watching us live on YouTube or Facebook and would like to take part in the Q&As in future webinars, you'll need to register for the session either via the CIM events page or through our posts on the usual socials, and watch via the GoToWebinar platform. Eleanor has very kindly agreed for her presentation slides to be available to download whilst we're broadcasting. So if you'd like a copy, just click on the handout icon and you'll find them in there. If you want to watch the session again, it'll be available on our YouTube channel. Just head into the playlist section and find the Webinar Express folder. You'll find the entire back catalogue of our Express series in there too, with sessions covering a broad range of marketing skills and insight, all free to access and available whenever you want. And finally, if you're a university student attending today's webinar, then you may want to sign up to the CIM Marketing Club. All you need to do is hover your camera over the QR code, and that will take you straight through to the sign up page. Alternatively, you can hop onto our website and find it within the qualifications drop-down menu. It'll keep you up to date with the latest trends, innovations, and concepts in the marketing industry, so it really is worth taking a look and signing up. And if you'd like to share your thoughts about today's webinar on the socials, you can use the hashtag CIM events. Just remember to put the CIM bit in capital letters. So I'd now like to introduce our speaker for today's session, Eleanor Mills. If you want to turn your webcam on, Eleanor, I'll pass things over to you, and the floor is yours when you're ready.
Oh, hello everybody, and welcome to our session today, which is called Queenagers, Not Walking Hot Flushes. So my name is Eleanor Mills. I'm the founder of a platform called noon.org.uk, which I refer to as the home of the Queenager. And hopefully they will now have given me control of my slides, so we can move into my presentation. Let's see what's going on here. Oops, let me see. It all worked beautifully during our practice session, but let's hope it will work now. Let's see. Oh, perfect. So Noon, this is the title of my platform for women in midlife, home of the Queenager, and I set it up because I worked for the Sunday Times for 25 years. Some of you may have known me when I was a columnist there. I was a columnist, I was the editorial director, I was the editor of the Sunday Times magazine, and I was also chair of Women in Journalism for nearly 10 years. So as a result of that, I had quite a good overview of the mainstream media, and particularly how it relates to women and how it sees women. And I think it would be fair to say that the opinions and the views of women in the mainstream are very much often seen from a male point of view, because men have traditionally run newspapers. Certainly in the time when I joined newspapers, there were very few women, and the women there were in what was known as the shallow end, which was like the style section, all the features bits, the arts section, and very few women actually directing the news. That's changed a bit now, but often the kinds of women who do get those jobs still have quite a kind of male lens on the world. So I set up Noon because I wanted to reflect the views of women in midlife. So by that I mean from between about 45 to 60, because I had looked at the research, which we're going to go into now, and I was pretty clear that our viewpoint and the world of the Queenager was not really being reflected in the way that I saw it and the way that I saw the women around me. So Noon is an expert-led online media platform which is designed to inspire and engage the midlife woman, and we we're on a very load of different channels. So we're on all sorts of different kinds of social media. You may have come across us there. And our main platform is a website called noon.org.uk. So I set up Noon because I think that age is the box that no one ticks when it comes to diversity. That's a picture of me when I founded Noon, which was about 18 months ago. And women in midlife, I think, are very much the forgotten cohort. And I could see that there was a real opportunity here because our spending power is so massively underestimated. So we're behind 93% of all household spending decisions. Half of us are the chief income earner in our family. We are 90% more likely than those under 40 to earn over 40 grand. And the reason why I think women in midlife, my Queenagers as I call them, are particularly important now is because in 2019, for the first time ever, women in their 40s started earning more than women under 40 for the very, very first time. So that shows a real social shift that it used to be that younger women earned more because when women started having families, and that kind of thing, they dropped out of the workforce, so they really cut down their hours. But women like me, I'm 51, have worked all the way through, and that is now reflected in our earning power, but the world has not caught up with us. So while we're behind all these spending decisions, and we'll go into all the kinds of things that Queenagers want to spend their money on, most of the world still it completely ignores us. We appear in less than 2% of advertising, probably because so few marketing directors and heads of agencies are women in this bracket. So just to give you a bit of background, women in midlife, my Queenagers, so that's like 45 to 60, have been dubbed super consumers by Forbes magazine in America. She spends £92 billion annually, and she out-earns her 30-year-old friends and out-consumes them by 250%. So that is a lot. She's interested in all sorts of things, and what we're particularly interested in at Noon is reflecting all the amazing things that these women are doing, achieving joy in her second act. So I talk a lot about how women in midlife deserve joy, fun, all the good stuff, which again is not something that you hear very much in the mainstream media. She's more educated, healthier, active and purpose-driven than ever. Not that you'd really know that in the way that we're usually depicted. And she's very interested in ideas on how to spend her money, but generally no one is really doing that. So that's why I think they're interesting. Age is a crucial part of diversity, but if you think about kind of race and sexuality and all those things that we usually think about in terms of diversity, no one's really thinking about age. Older women of all backgrounds suffer exclusion. Modern cultures glorify youth. And I think the wisdom of the elder female has been marginalised. Our needs are unmet and uncatered for. And so I think women want real inclusion, and that means really talking about what I call gendered ageism, which is where ageism meets sexism, and which hits women particularly hard, basically because that is where the sexism that's all over our patriarchal culture also hits age. So if you think that generally in our culture we glorify youth, women in particular are valued for beauty and fecundity, so how fanciable they are, how many children they have within a patriarchy. That's very much women's kind of roles. But I think that's rubbish. I think we need to start valuing ourselves. Do you think of women as like a rainbow? If we're only valued for our fanciability and our fecundity, which is kind of what the male lens does to us, there are all those other colours, all those other things that we can do, our intelligence, our purpose, our energy, our creativity, which don't get a look in. So this is why I talk about Queenagers, and I'm interested in really changing the story that we tell about the later stages of women's lives. And that's why I set up Noon, which is full of incredibly positive stories about what women can do at this point. And what I do at Noon is to connect brands to these women so that they can have a different kind of conversation and reach what my friend Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Meta, describes as an incredibly underserved cohort. And as all of you know, within the marketing firmament, there aren't very many pieces of the map which are really kind of, white space. And I think that women in midlife really are that, because so few brands actually target us. So at Noon, these women are our expert specialist subject. We call them Queenagers, and that came out of this big Noon research project we did, which was called Meet the Queenagers, which we did with the consulting firm Accenture. It's the biggest, deepest dive into women of this age and stage that's ever been done. So we know more about Queenagers, we think, than anybody else. And our findings were really interesting. So by the time women get to 50 or 50, between 45, 60, they have been through a lot. We talk about Queenagers as being forged in fire. They've survived. Over half of them have experienced 5 or more of these things: grief, divorce, illness, infertility, abusive and violent relationships, job losses, bankruptcy, parental death, financial crisis, and more. But rather than that making them kind of gloomy and despondent and depressed, for most of them, the vast majority, the greater the crises that they've been through, the happier they are now. So we had lots of, I'll get back to that slide actually. We had lots of women talking about how they now saw themselves as, say, delightedly divorced. Or we had an incredible woman who'd become a celebrant. So she was a kind of humanist doing marriages and funerals and things like that. And she'd had cancer and she'd been divorced, but she said that, and she'd left her big corporate job, but she said that this was the happiest point in her life, that she'd never been as happy as she is at the moment, that she felt like she was in her prime, that she was moving into kind of purpose and a real sense that this was her time. So many of the women say things like, I've spent the last 25 years looking after everybody else. This is time for me. This is what I want to do more than anything else. So there's lots of stuff around. I feel much younger than my age. About half of them say that they feel invisible to society. They feel like they're becoming the woman they're supposed to be. They feel like they are coming into their prime, but they don't feel that the world is reflecting them at all. So I'm going to talk particularly today, our Big Noon research project goes into how they feel about work, how they feel about their lives, all sorts of different areas. Because this is a marketing talk, I'm going to talk to you particularly about their attitudes to companies and brands. So this pretty well summed it up. This was a woman who's actually a partner in a law firm in London, so she's pretty well off. She says, I'm single, I'm 51, and it's like I just don't kind of exist. She never sees herself kind of replicated anywhere. But what is really interesting, in our Noon research, about 40% of these women are living on their own. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is that between 25% and a third do not have children. And 40% of the ones who've chosen who don't have children have actively chosen not to become mothers. So that's also a massive hole. This is another quote. Basically, I'm single, I haven't got kids, and so yeah, I'm disposable income arama. And yet no brands are talking to her, which just seems to me to be completely crazy. And somebody took out the expletive in this, which is basically, I like nice things, I buy nice things, and I don't have to ask anybody if I can buy the nice things because it's my bleep money, because I bleep earned it. They're quite forthright, my Queenagers. They call a spade a spade. And what I thought was really interesting about this is that they really will spend money on themselves. And this is our Newcastle focus group, who actually spent quite a lot of the focus group talking about how much money they spent on vibrators. They were saying they would spend £240 on the right kind of vibrator, but again, not a conversation that we hear very much about in the mainstream. But they say basically brands are missing a trick because we're the ones with a lot more disposable income. The problem is they don't have the language to sell to our demographic. Queenagers, we don't just want it to look pretty. If people spoke to us in our language, then I think that would be more successful. We'd feel seen. And we want people who are a bit more normal looking. So that's really interesting. So if you think about the older women that you do see in adverts or on TV, they're often ones who have been very much kind of youthified. They don't really look like most of us kind of 50 somethings out there. They're the ones who, if you think about, say, Carla Bruni, who was married to the French president, who was photographed on the catwalk, she's a model in Paris. She looks like she's maybe about 22. I've never seen somebody of 50 with such a flat stomach. So those are the kind of women that the media likes to show us in older women. And I used to come across this a lot. I was the editor of the Sunday Times magazine. I'd go up to my editor, often with, say, some amazing shots of a very kind of famous or amazing 70-year-old woman or actress, and I usually get a reaction which would be a bit like, oh gosh, do we have to have her looking like this, i.e. at 70? Can't we have her, you know, when she was 24, when she was in that movie and she looked really sexy? So there's a real kind of sense, you know, within newspapers, within marketing, within advertising, that women are basically there. The phrase that they used to use in newspapers was, women were there to brighten up the page, love, which basically meant putting a picture of a pretty girl, make it look a bit more cheerful. So if you think that, and I had a lot of conversations when I was a newspaper editor around how women were depicted. A lot of women, and as chair of Women in Journalism, we did a lot of research around this, which would be to say, most of the women who were in the stories were either arm candy, so they were, you know, like a wag or something, or somebody's partner, or they were victims. So most of the news stories, you'd go down the list, and the ones that did feature women, the women would be either victims or arm candy. And I used to make myself quite unpopular by saying, where are the women with agency? Where are the women doing things in their own right? And it's the same in movies. There's something called the Bechdel test, which is there a female character which talks about something which is not the love interest for more than 30 seconds? And hardly any movies pass the Bechdel test. So really think about how women are depicted in the culture, because this is what I'm trying to tackle at Noon. It's a bigger thing. So this is the lack of representation. So the women feel largely invisible. They want to be seen. The incredible woman who did a lot of this research and did some of the focus groups for me said she'd never seen a cohort of people, she's been doing this for 20 years, who was so desperate to be heard, because they just felt that they would never ask their opinion about anything. They really want products that meet their needs and brands that engage with them. They really welcome tangible examples of good environmental practice, but they're very sniffy about greenwashing. And most of them say they don't really care about brands, but then they're wearing designer trainers. So there was one woman, I don't know if I've got the quote here or not, who talked about, she said that she'd spent £150 on some trainers because they felt like duvets on her feet, and she felt like she was walking on clouds. And so these women have got money, and they will pay for the things that work for them. So they loved brands like the North Face that were like keeping them dry when they were walking their dogs, or they quite like things like Sweaty Betty because they were kind of comfortable and they felt like they were trying to do some things for them. They like John Lewis. I'm a big fan of John Lewis. My new John Lewis jacket, actually, very much home of the Queenagers. I like a bit of John Lewis. But they want, but they feel most of the time that brands really do not give them what they want. So they want brands that are sustainable. They get things like Amazon and Apple, which aren't. They want brands that will do something positive for the environment. So they talk about things like Toms. I don't know if you've heard of that brand. They make kind of canvas shoes. If you buy a pair of shoes, they'll give a pair of their shoes to somebody in the developing world. There's some really interesting stuff in our research about what Queenagers want from work. I do quite a lot of consulting with companies around Queenagers, because basically if companies get it right for Queenagers, what Queenagers want is flexibility, autonomy, control over their own time, meaningful work. Sound familiar? That's because millennials and Gen Z want that too. So we reckon that if companies get it right for their senior women, for their Queenagers, the Queenagers are a bit like the canary in the coal mine on whether they really mean it when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion for the rest of their workforce. So we're increasingly doing a lot of work around what are you doing for your senior women, because if you're getting it right for them, then you're going to be the kind of place that other talent wants to stay. But what they get, they want jobs that give them flexibility, work-life balance, meaningful work. They don't really get that. And so they end up having to start their own businesses. Lots of them leave. 27% of people over 50 at the moment are branded economically inactive. The Department for Work and Pensions is trying to get them back, and they are also really trying to these women, the Queenagers, are setting up businesses at a faster rate than any other demographic. So there are so many women like me who've worked for corporates for years, have kind of got quite sick of it or been made redundant, and are setting up on their own. So one of the things that we do at Noon is we have something called the Queenager Directory, where we do a kind of hero. We hero the brands that are doing fantastic things for these women, and also our Queenager entrepreneurs, because there are so many women doing things now in this space for these women, because the major brands are really not doing that. So that's a real opportunity, I think, for a lot of brands. So they want clothes that fit their shapes. They feel like they're having to make do and research into new brands. Wonderfully glamorous 75-year-old was saying to me she'd written to the head of Zara saying, why don't you do anything which is kind of, you know, specifically for the older women, saying that things are often too short or the wrong shape for her, but she wanted to look kind of, you know, current. And they want brands that celebrate all shapes and sizes. We know that's getting a bit better. I mean, I love something, there's a brand in London called Fabletics, which I love. They were showing pictures of women, really large women in gold leggings, and I thought that was a wonderful like celebration, different kinds of body shapes. So we're beginning to get a bit more of that body positivity, but even the brands that are doing that, say around larger women, are not talking about older women yet. When was the last time you saw a mannequin where the woman was actually obviously a bit older? Never. So they want like good quality healthcare. They get a mess that they have to knit together. There's huge solutions there. There's some really interesting people beginning to come into the menopause space. We'll talk about menopause in a minute. They want to be recognised as a source of help and advice. Queenagers are basically an army of supporters that we don't really notice. In the workplace, they're often seen as mentors. Women over 50 are twice as likely to mentor younger people of colour and other diversity within the workplace than a senior man. But again, none of that kind of extra work gets noticed. They're very keen on sex, the Queenagers, interested in vibrators. They want to do dating. What they get are apps that feel degrading. There's a huge opportunity there, I think, to do that in a different kind of way. In fact, we're going to set up a dating site on Noon that's going to launch in January. Again, the same on politics. They want politicians who get it. They get loads of men who don't, and they want things to be authentic, honest, and funny. They get stuff being glossy, perfect, and showy, and not representing them. And what they really want is to be talked to as they would talk to each other. So I mentioned menopause. There's lots of menopause around in the culture at the moment, all that Davina McCall stuff. It's really, really important that we are finally having that conversation. It's something that we do talk about at Noon. On World Menopause Day, I did a big debate. You'll see some pretty amazing women on there, some of whom you might recognise. Top left there is Carolyn Harris MP, who is a wonderful Queenager herself. She is a working class woman from Swansea. She was a barmaid. She worked as a dinner lady. One of her sons died, and then she went back to university and got a degree and became an MP in her early 50s. And surprise, surprise, she is the MP who's been leading the charge on menopause care. We have just launched I wrote a piece in The Guardian about how the menopause conversation is quite uninclusive. She said she'd gone to speak to a whole load of shop workers in her constituency in Swansea about menopause, and they'd said to her, "Oh, aren't you posh having a menopause?" Because it seemed very much as a kind of white middle class conversation. So I think that needs to be more inclusive. And also about if you look at rates of prescription of HRT in the UK, the richest areas of the UK, you're twice as likely to be prescribed HRT as you are if you're in the poorest areas or you come from a BAME or non-white background. So there's a real problem here with access to information and all that kind of stuff around menopause. So that is a very important conversation that we're having. Many of you won't know, but GPs haven't until now had to be trained in menopause, even though it happens to half the population. There's real problems with access to prescription and to treatment. And there's a huge inequality around this. So it's very important that we talk about it. But at the same time, what we discover in Noon is that when now that the menopause conversation has kind of bubbled up, and the women are really pleased that it has, but they don't want to be defined by menopause. It's one thing to say there's a huge health inequality here, but they don't want to be defined by it. I've got teenage daughters, they're 20 and 17, but I wouldn't define them as having periods. In the same way, I said this at Adweek, you wouldn't say to a whole room full of middle-aged men, you're in the Viagra years, welcome to the, the limp whatever club. So in the same way, women don't want to be defined as menopausal, even though they want access to the right treatment. And I think a lot of brands are getting this wrong at the moment and talking about menopause as if that's the only thing that's going on in a queenager's life, when of course it's just one of many things, and lots of us are moving into different chapters. And for about 1 in 4 women, menopause is really awful, and of course they need protection in the workplace and access to treatment. But for most of us, it's really, it's okay, we need some support, and then we want the support so that we can get on with living our broader lives. And I think brands are missing a trick if they then just see Queenagers as being about menopause. We're about much more than that. And in fact, in the research that we did, we found that 78% of women 45 to 60 did not want to be branded menopausal. That's why I called this talk Queenagers, Not Walking Hot Flushes, because while we want justice and health equality, we do not want to be defined as menopausal, and brands need to be wary of that trap. Of course, if you're doing something health related, maybe defining it as menopausal is fine, but women of this stage want to be seen as who they are in the round, and to for brands to reflect all their other interests, lots of them going back to study, setting up businesses. They say they're coming into their prime, that they're doing all these things that they've always wanted to do. So I think it's really important that they're not just put in a menopausal box. So let me tell you a bit about Noon and how we work with brands. So we have an incredible advisory board of Queenagers, some of the most powerful women in the UK, many of whom are old friends and comrades of mine, because I worked at the top of the media for a long time, so I've got a pretty incredible address book. So we kind of pull on their support to help us, and they really influence the kinds of things that we cover. We have 150,000 unique users. We do a newsletter. Some of you may have heard of Substack. Substack is it's massive in America, where journalists and writers can reach directly out to a cohort. So I have a newsletter which has actually 10,000 newsletter subscribers now, who hear from me every week, and that has between a 50 and an 80% open rate, which is pretty massive. We also have a paying community there, of super engaged one, and the women love our content. So we have an average engagement of about nearly 5 minutes, and I know, because I ran national magazines, that that's a lot higher than a lot of newspapers. We have very active channels on LinkedIn. Our Noon posts often reach up to 10-20,000 subscribers, up to 500,000. We find that LinkedIn's a really powerful place for our Queenagers. Instagram also is good. Twitter, as you all know, is a bit problematic at the moment. Facebook sometimes works. So the way that we work with clients at Noon, we do thought leadership. I'm just going to tell you about our Vision Express, a big campaign we've just done for Vision Express, fronted by Joe Wiley. We do events, we run retreats, we run workshops, we do online campaigns, because we really know how to talk to these women, and we also advise brands on how to speak to these women so that they connect. And we use our community of Queenagers to test brand messages for people so that they know that they've got it right. Queenagers are nobody's fool. They know if they're being sold a pup. And so we can convene quick focus groups from our community to find out what people really think about things. So we do that kind of sampling. We do consulting and research. This big bit of research we did with Accenture. So we're also speaking to their clients and lots of other blue chips about how to speak to Queenagers, particularly financial services, because these women are controlling quite a lot of money. And we do a lot of native content for other brands as well, articles, interviews, videos. We've done a whole series of stuff around health inequalities for Theramax, and we did some stuff for Aromatherapy Associates, part of Boots. So we work specifically with brands about content which we know will appeal to our audience. So this was the launch of This Is Me with Helena Morrissey and Joe Wiley at the Groucho Club, launching a Queenager campaign for Vision Express. You can see Queenagers there. So if you go into any Vision Express, I hope you like my specs, if you go into any Vision Express in the UK, they've now got a whole Queenager thing, which is being led by Joe Wiley, which is my thought leadership around see yourself differently in midlife, see yourself through a new lens. Let's reframe what women at this point are capable of. I absolutely love Jane Exton, who's the marketing director of Vision Express. They're really, I mean, Queenagers make up a huge number of their customers. So they've been really receptive to this new conversation about women in midlife and reframing that debate. So we worked with them. We did a panel, we did a couple of panels talking to lots of different women about why they love being 50, how they felt about moving into their prime, and all of those conversations have been kind of chopped up and put out on social. We live streamed this on Instagram. This is in all the shops. It's on the Vision Express website. So it's all about saying you could be really positive about getting to this age. It doesn't have to be the end. You're not invisible. There's so much more to come. That's our big slogan at Noon. And Joe Wiley is our kind of ambassador for Queenagers at Vision Express. She's just an incredible kind of Queenager ambassador, I think. Very kind of natural, very much kind of in her, you know, coming into her prime. So there she is. There's Joe Wiley being Queenager in chief, new way of looking at midlife. So that's the kind of new kind of thought leadership and the way that we're working with brands. So that is quite a lot from me and about Noon, and these are some incredible Queenagers, some of whom you will recognise. That's a very glamorous picture of me down on the bottom left, which was taken by the photographer Rankin, massively airbrushed, just so you know that the kind of pictures that you see of kind of celebrities, or that's Sarah Jessica Parker, are usually kind of quite manipulated, because you can see I didn't really quite look like I do when I was photographed by Rankin. But anyway, there we are. That is the end of my formal presentation. If you'd like to know more about us at Noon, do have a look at our website and do sign up to our Noon newsletter. I write a newsletter every week called The Queenager about all the things that I'm doing and all sorts of other things too, really about moving into a new phase in midlife. I've just come back from a 6-day silent retreat. So I wrote about that, swimming with seals and what it was like not being able to talk to anyone for 6 days. And so it's a whole kind of mixture of things, but really trying to reframe how women are coming into their prime in midlife and really challenge gendered ageism. So all of you who are marketeers, if you're really thinking about how you might reach a demographic with huge spending power who are really underserved by brands, hardly ever targeted because of the male lens of our society, I think Queenagers are a really good place to start. Thank you. I'm Eleanor Mills, founder of Noon. I'd love to take some of your questions.
Thank you, Eleanor. That was brilliant. Before we go into the Q&A session, I'll just read a comment made by one of the viewers today. So Emma has actually said, not a question, but a big thank you. This has been fantastic. When I grow up, I'll be a proud Queenager. So that probably resonates with a lot of our viewers today. Okay, so we're now going to have a short.
That's so nice to hear. I mean, actually, one of the things I didn't say, but which I really believe is part of the reason I set this up, is because I want my daughters to look forward to being 50 as when they come into their prime, not to dread it as a point where they disappear. And I think it's so important to combat and challenge some of the ridiculous kind of anti-aging messages in our society, and how important it is and how lucky we are to get to 50. I've got friends who are now no longer with us, so I feel joyful every day to be here.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, I think, as I say, a lot of our viewers today will thoroughly resonate with what you've presented today. We're going to have a quick short Q&A. We've already got some questions to get us underway, which we'll get to in a second. But please do continue to post your questions for Eleanor by selecting the question mark icon, and we'll try and get through as many as we can in the next 15 minutes or so. And just a reminder for those watching via Facebook or YouTube, that if you want to take part in future Q&As, you'll need to register for the webinars with the CRM events page or social posts and watch the session via the GoToWebinar platform. Okay, so Eleanor, first question. One of our viewers joined the session five or so minutes in, and didn't pick up originally what age group you were talking about. I know you're talking
Oh, okay.
about 45 to 60s, but are there any? Are they just one big lump, one big cohort, or are there any differences between the 45-year-old and the 60-year-old within the Queenagers cohort?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. In fact, I've been criticised by some of the ladies in my community for stopping it at 65. So I don't really think Queenagerhood has a kind of upper limit. I think it's really about kind of how we feel, and are there differences within the cohort? I would say that the 45-year-olds are probably have slightly different concerns. But what I find really interesting is that so many women of my generation, there's a real spread on those of us who've had children. And as I say, it's only like about 2/3 of us who have had kids. So I'm not just defining us by being mothers. But for instance, I had my first daughter when I was 31. One of my best friends has had her first daughter at 45. So my daughter's at university. Her daughter's still, in primary school. So I think that that's interesting, that in some ways it's not really an age which is such a marker on this cohort, but kind of the decisions that they've made about other aspects of their lives. So I'm a kind of empty nester. My younger one's about to finish her A-levels, the other one's at university. But I've got contemporaries who are still very much in the kind of weeds of kind of, school parents' evenings and all that kind of thing with much younger children. So, and they will still be there kind of in 10 years time when my children I might be becoming a grandmother. So I think in some ways it's really interesting that age isn't necessarily the key marker of what stage women tend to be at in this cohort. What I do see is many women move whatever you've been doing, by the time you get to 50, kind of what it tends to spit you out and you need to do something else. I mean, I'd worked for the Sunday Times for 25 years, but I was talking to a woman last week down in Devon who'd worked in admin for the local council, and she said that she'd just gone back and retrained as a reflexologist, and she was also spending more time with her grandchildren, and she'd taken up kind of crocheting hats. She'd got divorced and moved into a new phase. So I think that this is really one of those things that we call at Noon the midlife maelstrom, that you never quite know, but suddenly you're kind of you're kind of tromping along, and then you just suddenly get hit by a whole load of things that might be your parents coming to bits because they get old, or you have teenagers who's got anxiety, or maybe you hit menopause and it's really quite tough for you, or work gets restructured and suddenly you're seen as a bit too old and your face doesn't fit anymore and you're out. But what I see, and people getting divorced, is a massive thing called silver splitters, which is women and couples in their 50s splitting up. But what seems to happen is just a whole load of changes all hit at the same time. And I think a lot of women are left, Queenagers, feeling really kind of all at sea, and that there are very few maps in our culture to what might come next. So the reason I set up Noon was, well, after I left the Sunday Times, I really felt like that. I remember kind of, Googling kind of, 50 something change of career, and just nothing coming up at all. And just thinking, knowing from having been a newspaper columnist for so many years, that things that I was going through, other people tended to be going through as well. And I started writing about it, and the articles had a huge response. And so I thought, right, I'm going to set up, President Obama talks about being the change that you want to see in the world. So I set up Noon to try and help women into their next chapter, to say, you're not done, you're not invisible, we see you. There are so many incredible women doing amazing stuff at this point, and there are so many options. You can go back and study. You can fulfill all those dreams that you've had. It doesn't matter kind of where you are in the UK or what your background is. You can move into another phase, and we'll help you and give you some of the tools to do that.
Okay. The question here is why the cohort term Queenagers? Why are they called Queenagers?
Well, you're all marketeers, so you'll understand the value and the power of a rebrand. And I definitely think that women in midlife needed a slightly more kind of sexy moniker. I came up with Queenager because, well, I've been running newspapers for years, so I was always having to come up with kind of, headlines, whether it was like too posh to push or whatever headlines are kind of my thing. One of the ladies in a Welsh focus group said to me that she felt like a teenager, but in her own home with nice sheets and posh tea. So that really stuck in my head. And there were lots of women saying that they felt like teenagers again. And I spend quite a lot of the time in Jamaica, and out there, women, you're often referred to as a queen. She's a queen is a big thing. And so I suppose the two things just coalesced in my head. And I thought, Queenagers, you know, we're a bit emotional, we're a bit hormonal, we're moving into a new phase. But we've got a lot of wisdom and experience and gravitas and dignity. We are queens. So I thought Queenagers, and it seems people seem to like it.
Yeah, it sticks, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. So this question is, given that us Queenagers are largely invisible and unheard of in the workplace, which totally resonates with me, how would you suggest I start to bring about positive change in the company where I work?
Oh, brilliant question. Well, I think the first thing you can do is maybe band together with some other Queenagers. The second thing you could do is really have a look at, get in touch with me and I'll give you some important ammunition if you want, because Queenagers are incredibly important for company culture. The senior women within organisations are doing so much of the kind of cultural glue which holds organisations together, and yet they're really unrecognised for it. I've done a lot of stuff with Sheryl Sandberg, who was at Facebook, who set up the Lean In Foundation, who wrote that wonderful book, Lean In, which is all about how to get ahead at work. And her research really shows that senior women are twice or 68% more likely than senior men to do that kind of informal mentoring and looking after kind of younger people within the organisation. So I think one of the things to do is to point out all the amazing things that the Queenagers within your organisation are doing. And I think the second thing to do is to say, do you know, we're going into a recession. A lot of people are going to have a lot less money. Actually, one of the cohorts who are much more relatively insulated from recessionary pressures are Queenagers. I was writing an article the other day, 60% of women in this cohort have paid off their mortgages. We've got a lot more discretionary spend than younger people who maybe have still got younger families and haven't earned so much or haven't accumulated kind of so much wealth over their careers. And so actually one of the categories that any business could be appealing to, who are more likely to have money to spend, are the Queenagers. And who better to understand them than someone within their organisation who is a Queenager herself? So those are the kind of two prongs of the things that I'm doing, that Queenagers are inherent to a company's kind of glue, their culture, and how they treat and hang on to their kind of more junior staff. And they're also key to a really underserved and lucrative demographic who are really not being spoken to. So there's like a huge bit of headroom there. If you start speaking to Queenagers, there's really strong evidence that they will respond to that and they'll love your brand because nobody else is doing it. And we've seen that. I've been working with a small new brand called Jude, who are interested in bladder health, and we did a whole load of work where we contrasted the adverts they did which showed kind of younger women and the ones which actually showing Queenagers, and the Queenager adverts did much better in selling the products. And it's interesting that some forward-looking brands are beginning to do this. So I was speaking at the Association of British Travel Agents massive international conference in Morocco a few weeks ago, and there's a brand there called Seabourn Cruises who've just done a huge campaign around, which is all about Queenagers, saying you deserve that dream holiday, all those days you've got up in the morning and you've slogged out to your job, and your reward is that you can kind of go on this cruise. And it absolutely kind of encapsulates the kind of thinking that we've been doing about Queenagers. I think that's really interesting. That was actually done for them by a Queenager run creative agency in LA called Grace Creative, which are a whole load of women in midlife who are actually crafting those adverts, so they really understand that mentality. But what's really interesting is within the broader advertising marketing firmament, if you go into some of the agencies in London, which I've done a bit recently, you don't see anybody 50. I mean, there's maybe a handful in the entire building. So it's not surprising that traditional advertising and marketing is missing the Queenager, because so many of the people who are creating those adverts are not Queenagers and are not thinking about them, and the men certainly aren't thinking about them. And there's some good figures. There was a big presentation at Cannes. People over 50 control 47% of all the wealth and appear in 2% of adverts. So, that really tells you something about the scope here.
Yeah, that's something that resonates with me as well. I'm now 64, and I don't feel like I'm marketed to either.
No.
So yeah, I think it's an issue that the advertising industry needs to address.
It's interesting, isn't it, that in lots of advertising campaigns, they just have a kind of bucket. So they divide everyone up very carefully, under 20 to 25, whatever. And then they just say over 50s. But, I'm 51. Over 50s is also my mum, who's 80. And we have completely different needs. And, then there's you too. So it's completely it's madness to me that we're the portion of the population which is controlling so much wealth, and yet we're all bunged in a kind of Zimmer frames and incontinence pads kind of bracket.
Yes, not quite there yet, but yeah, not far off probably. There are so many questions left to ask, but we've run out of time. And also, Eleanor, I've never seen so many comments about a session where people are, just so inspired by what it is that you've presented. So you've done a great job. I think this might answer quite a few of the outstanding questions. Is the research available anywhere? Can people actually find it and read up a bit more about this research?
There are some articles. I wrote a big article in the Telegraph about they did a thing saying brands would be foolish to ignore the power of midlife women. So that article is up on Noon. I haven't actually put it all up there because it's slightly my crown jewels that I use for consulting. But
Sure.
these slides are up there, and a lot of the key insights, and anyone who's interested, if you email me, so if you go to noon.org.uk, which is our website, and you can sign up for my Substack newsletter, and if you look at that, there's a lot of information in my Substacks about the research. And if there's if you email me directly, we have a kind of consulting team at Noon. And we will help you. And if there's real desire for it, I can put up some more of it. I can put up some of these slides about kind of working with brands. The stuff about kind of Queenagers and work, I very much use when I'm consulting directly. So we haven't put all of this out there. But as I say, if you get in touch with me, I'm very happy to share kind of more of it with you.
Yeah, so just to head to your website and make contact that way. Brilliant. Okay.
And also because we did this research with Accenture, we're also doing some thought leadership with them around it too, which is why we haven't released it all. But I will actually have a chat with them. I've got to see them next week about making this more available.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Eleanor. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for our Q&A today. So once again, I'd like to say thank you to Eleanor. Fantastic presentation, and also to the CIM Southwest group for organising the webinar. We do hope you've enjoyed the session and found it interesting and worthwhile. We'll be sending out a short survey in the next few hours and would love to hear your feedback. It will only take a few minutes, and all survey responses are anonymous, so please do let us know your thoughts and what you'd like to see from our Webinar Express series in the future. We'll be taking a little bit of a break now for the Christmas holidays, but we'll be back in January, so keep an eye out for our Webinar Express emails in your inbox and on the events page of our website to see what's coming up next year. So that just leaves me to say a final thank you to you for joining us today, and we hope you've enjoyed the webinar. Take care, everyone. Have a lovely Christmas and New Year, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2023.